March 9th, 1945. It's just after midnight and Tokyo is about to burn. 334 Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers are inbound. They're flying low, lower than they've ever flown before. Low enough that the crews can feel the heat rising from the city below. Low enough that they know. If anything goes wrong, there's no altitude to save them. Inside each bomber, the air smells like oil and sweat and fear. The crews are exhausted. Some of them haven't slept in days. But tonight isn't about precision. It's not about hitting a factory or a rail yard. Tonight, they're going to turn an entire city into an inferno. And thousands of miles away in the shattered ruins of Nazi Germany, officers who've spent years studying American capabilities are about to hear the reports. They'll read the intelligence summaries, they'll see the reconnaissance photos, and some of them will say it out loud. We never had a chance. Because the B-29 wasn't just a bomber. It was proof, undeniable, terrifying proof, that America had reached a level of industrial and technological power that no one else on Earth could match. Not Germany, not Japan, not anyone. Let's go back a few years. Europe's already at war. The Luftwaffe is pounding London. German U-boats are strangling the Atlantic. And across the ocean in a country that's not even fighting yet, American engineers are sitting in a Boeing conference room, staring at a problem that seems impossible. They need to build a bomber that can fly higher, farther, and carry more than anything that's ever existed. The Army Air Corps wants something that can strike Japan from bases thousands of miles away. They want pressurized cabins, so crews don't freeze or black out at altitude. They want remote-controlled gun turrets. They want speed. They want range. They want everything. And they want it fast. One of the engineers reportedly looked at the specs and said, "You're asking us to build an airplane that doesn't exist yet." His supervisor nodded. Exactly. The result was the B-29 Superfortress, and it almost didn't happen. The development process was a nightmare. Engines caught fire, prototypes crashed. The pressurization system leaked. The Wright R-3350 engines, the most powerful radial engines ever built, were temperamental, prone to overheating, and had a nasty habit of bursting into flames mid-flight. One test pilot called them the engine that eats mechanics. But Boeing kept pushing. They had to, because by 1942, America was in the war. And the only way to reach Japan's industrial heartland was with a bomber that could do the impossible. The B-29 that finally rolled off the production line in 1943 was like nothing anyone had seen before. It had a wingspan of 141 feet, a length of 99 feet. It could cruise at 30,000 feet so high that enemy fighters struggled to reach it. It had a range of over 3,000 miles. It could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs. And here's the thing that made German intelligence officers sit up and take notice: it had a pressurized cabin. That might not sound like much, but it meant that American crews could fly in shirt sleeves at altitudes where German and Japanese pilots were gasping for oxygen in freezing cockpits. It meant longer missions, less fatigue, better accuracy. It meant that America had solved problems most countries didn't even know existed yet. The first B-29s started arriving in the Pacific in 1944. The Japanese called them B-29 B-29, but to the people on the ground, they had another name: B-san, Mr. B. At first, the raids were cautious, high-altitude precision bombing, trying to take out aircraft factories, oil refineries, steel mills, the kind of strategic bombing that looked good in briefing rooms but didn't always work in practice. Cloud cover made targeting difficult. Winds at altitude threw off the bomb runs. and Japan's industrial infrastructure was spread out, mixed in with residential areas in ways that made precision strikes almost impossible. The man in charge, Major General Curtis LeMay, was getting frustrated. LeMay was 38 years old, chain-smoked cigars, had a face that looked like it was carved out of granite. He'd earned his reputation in Europe leading B-17 bomber formations through some of the worst flak defenses the Germans could throw at them. He didn't believe in caution. He believed in results, and by early 1945 he'd made a decision that would change everything. Strip out the guns, fly low, load up with incendiaries, and burn Japan's cities to the ground. His staff thought he was insane. Flying low meant flying into range of anti-aircraft guns. Stripping out defensive weapons meant the bombers were vulnerable, and incendiaries. That wasn't precision bombing. That was something else. But LeMay had done the math. Japan's cities were tinderboxes, wooden buildings packed close together, narrow streets, limited firefighting capacity. One good firestorm could do more damage than a dozen precision raids. "We're going to shorten this war," he told his officers, "and we're going to do it by making them understand that they can't win." March 9, 1945. Operation Meeting House. The B-29s come in low over Tokyo just after midnight. They're flying at 5,000 feet, low enough that the searchlights catch them immediately, low enough that the flak bursts are close enough to rattle the airframes. But they're also flying fast, and there are so many of them that the Japanese defenses are overwhelmed from the start. The lead bombers drop their payloads first, M69 incendiary clusters. Each one breaks apart in mid-air, scattering hundreds of smaller bomblets. They're filled with napalm, a jellied gasoline that sticks to everything it touches and burns at over 2,000 degrees. Within minutes, fires are spreading across entire city blocks. The follow-up bombers see the flames from miles away. Some of the pilots later said it looked like the sun was rising in the middle of the night. Others said it looked like a vision of hell. One navigator wrote in his log, "The smell of burning flesh reached us at 6,000 feet. The fires created their own weather. Superheated air rose so fast it generated winds strong enough to rip roofs off buildings. The firestorm fed on itself, sucking in oxygen, creating tornado-like vortexes of flame. People on the ground had nowhere to go. The canals boiled, the rivers were clogged with bodies. Some tried to hide in concrete buildings, only to suffocate as the firestorm consumed all the oxygen. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo were gone. Just gone. The official death toll was over 100,000 people. Some estimates put it higher. It was the single deadliest air raid in history. More people died that night than in the immediate aftermath of either atomic bomb. And the B-29s, they flew home, refueled, rearmed, and did it again. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because Germany was watching. Even as the Third Reich collapsed around them, even as Soviet tanks rolled into Berlin and Allied forces crossed the Rhine, German intelligence officers were still filing reports, still analyzing enemy capabilities, still trying to understand how the war had gone so wrong. And the B-29 kept coming up. There are accounts, some from interrogations after the war, some from documents captured by Allied forces of German commanders expressing something close to awe when they learned the full specifications of the Superfortress. One Luftwaffe general, after being shown reconnaissance photos of the Tokyo raids, reportedly said, "We were building jets and rockets. They were building this. We focused on winning battles. They focused on winning wars." Because here's what the Germans understood, maybe better than anyone, The B-29 wasn't just a weapon. It was a product of an industrial base that Germany couldn't hope to match. Consider the numbers. Germany produced about 40,000 aircraft in 1944, their peak year. America produced over 96,000. And that's not counting the ships, tanks, trucks, and everything else rolling off assembly lines in Detroit, Seattle, and 100 other cities. The B-29 alone required resources that would have crippled most economies. Each aircraft used 600,000 rivets, miles of wiring, engines so complex they required specialized tools and trained mechanics. Boeing built entire factories just to produce them facilities. So large they generated their own weather patterns inside the assembly buildings. And America built nearly 4,000 of them. A German officer who'd worked in armaments production was interviewed after the war. He was asked what impressed him most about Allied equipment. He didn't mention the Sherman tank. He didn't mention the P-51 Mustang. He said, the B-29. Because when I saw what they'd done with that aircraft, I understood that we'd been fighting a country that was playing a different game entirely. Let's talk about what made the B-29 so special. Start with the engines. The Wright R-3350 Duplex Cyclone, 18 cylinders, supercharged, each one producing over 2,200 horsepower, 4 of them per aircraft. They were monsters. Powerful, yes, but also temperamental. They ran hot. They leaked oil. Early models had a tendency to swallow valves, seize up, or catch fire. Boeing test pilots called flying the early B-29s riding a potential funeral pyre. But American engineers fixed it. Not perfectly, engine fires remained a problem throughout the war, but well enough that the B-29 became reliable enough for combat operations. Germany, meanwhile, was struggling to produce enough fuel to fly the aircraft they already had. Their jets, the Me-262, which should have been a game-changer, spent most of the war grounded because they didn't have the resources to keep them in the air. The B-29's pressurized cabin was another marvel. It used a system of engine-driven compressors to maintain sea-level pressure at 30,000 feet. Sounds simple. It wasn't. The entire fuselage had to be sealed. Every rivet, every hatch, every access panel. The smallest leak could depressurize the cabin and incapacitate the crew. Boeing engineers tested and retested. They built elaborate pressure chambers. They put full-scale fuselage sections through thousands of cycles looking for weaknesses. And it worked. American bomber crews flew missions in relative comfort, while their counterparts in other air forces froze and struggled for oxygen. The remote-controlled gun turrets were pure science fiction for 1945. The gunners sat inside the pressurized cabin looking through plexiglass sighting stations. When they moved their controls, electric motors swiveled the turrets on the outside of the aircraft. It gave them faster reaction times, better accuracy. And it meant they weren't sitting in exposed positions vulnerable to cold and enemy fire. One German intelligence report noted that the B-29's defensive systems were more sophisticated than anything in our arsenal, including experimental types. But here's the thing that really set the B-29 apart. It wasn't just one amazing aircraft. It was proof of a system. Think about what it took to put those bombers over Tokyo. You needed the factories to build them, not just one or two, but entire production lines running 24 hours a day. You needed the aluminum, the rubber, the electronics, the plexiglass. All of it sourced, refined, manufactured, and delivered on schedule. You needed the air bases carved out of jungles on Pacific islands, built by construction battalions working in brutal heat. You needed the fuel. Millions of gallons of aviation gasoline shipped across an ocean stored in massive tank farms. You needed the bombs. The incendiaries alone required specialized production facilities. You needed the crews. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, flight engineers, all trained to exacting standards. And when they were killed or wounded, and many were, you needed replacements ready to go. You needed the maintenance personnel, the supply chain, the spare parts, the technical manuals. You needed intelligence gathering, weather forecasting, mission planning. You needed all of it working together smoothly, efficiently on the other side of the world from where most of it was produced. That's what stunned the Germans. Not just that America built the B-29, but that America built thousands of them, deployed them to the Pacific, and kept them flying day after day, month after month. One captured German logistics officer put it bluntly, "You can't beat a country that treats aircraft like this as disposable." The Tokyo raid wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Over the next 5 months, B-29s hit more than 60 Japanese cities: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. The tactics were refined. The firebombing campaigns became routine. LeMay's crews flew missions almost every night, weather permitting. By summer, there weren't many targets left. Japan's industrial capacity was shattered. Its cities were burned out husks. Its people were starving. And then came August. On the 6th, a B-29 named Enola Gay dropped a single bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 boxcar did the same to Nagasaki. The atomic bombs ended the war, but in a strange way they overshadowed what the B-29 had already accomplished, because even without the atomic bombs, Japan was finished. The firebombing campaigns had destroyed its ability to wage war. The naval blockade had cut off resources, and the B-29s kept coming unstoppable, untouchable. One Japanese officer interviewed after the surrender said something that stuck with the American interrogators. "We knew we'd lost when we saw how many of them there were. We'd shoot one down, and 10 more would take its place. You can't fight that. You can only survive it." After the war, when historians started analyzing what went wrong for the Axis powers, the B-29 kept coming up. German military theorists, the ones who weren't executed or imprisoned, wrote extensively about strategic bombing. They acknowledged that Germany had underestimated America's industrial capacity. But more than that, they'd misunderstood America's approach to war. Germany built Wunderwaffen wonder weapons, jets, rockets, tanks so heavy they couldn't cross most bridges. They chased technological perfection. America built systems, mass production, logistics, standardization. They didn't need the perfect weapon. They needed good enough weapons in overwhelming numbers. The B-29 was both. It was technologically advanced and mass-produced. It was a masterpiece of engineering and a product of assembly line efficiency. One former Luftwaffe pilot years after the war gave an interview where he said, "When I first saw intelligence photos of the B-29, I thought it was propaganda. Something that advanced couldn't be real. When I learned they'd built thousands of them, I understood why we lost." There's a scene that plays out in history books and documentaries, but it deserves to be lingered on. May 1945. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. American and Soviet forces are sorting through the rubble of German military installations. They're finding documents, blueprints, interrogating engineers and officers. And there's this moment recorded in several different accounts where German aviation experts are shown detailed specs and photos of the B-29. One of them, an engineer who'd worked on the Heinkel He-177 heavy bomber, studied the documents for a long time. Finally, he said, "We thought we were ahead. We thought our jets and rockets meant we were leading in technology. But this is years beyond anything we conceived." How did they do this while also fighting a war on two fronts? The American officer, showing him the documents, shrugged. "We're good at building things." It's almost comical how much that undersells it. Because the B-29 represented something fundamental about American power in the 20th century. It wasn't just about resources, though America had those in abundance. It wasn't just about innovation, though American engineers were brilliant. It was about the ability to scale, to take an idea and turn it into 1,000 finished products, to solve problems not with elegant solutions, but with overwhelming force and industrial capacity. Let's talk about one more thing: the cost. The B-29 program was the single most expensive weapons program of World War II. More expensive than the Manhattan Project, more expensive than anything else America built. Each aircraft cost about $640,000 in 1945 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's nearly $10 million today. America built 3,170 of them. Do the math. That's over $2.5 billion in 1945 dollars. Tens of billions in today's money. And that's just the aircraft. It doesn't count the bases, the training, the fuel, the bombs, the support infrastructure. For comparison, Germany's entire military budget in 1944 was roughly equivalent to $60 billion in today's dollars. America spent a significant fraction of that on one bomber program. That's what the German commanders couldn't wrap their heads around. They'd been fighting a war of scarcity, rationing fuel, scraping together resources, making hard choices between jets or tanks or submarines. America was fighting a war of abundance, building everything everywhere all at once. One German general, after being shown production figures, reportedly laughed, not from humor, from the sheer absurdity of it. "How do you fight that?" he asked. "You can't sink their factories. You can't bomb their assembly lines. They're on the other side of the world. You just lose. Slowly, inevitably, you lose." The B-29 kept flying long after World War II ended. Korea, Cold War patrol missions, testing platforms for new technologies. But its real legacy isn't measured in flight hours or missions flown. It's measured in what it represented. When the Boeing engineers started designing it in 1940, they were working on problems that no one had solved before. Pressurized cabins at scale, remote gun turrets, long-range navigation systems, engines powerful enough to carry massive loads across oceans. They didn't have computers. They had slide rules and drafting tables and determination. And they built something that even today stands as a testament to what's possible when innovation meets industrial capacity. The German officers who studied the B-29 after the war understood something that's easy to miss from a distance. Technology alone doesn't win wars. Resources alone don't win wars. But the ability to turn innovation into production to solve problems at scale, to build not just weapons, but entire systems of warfare that wins wars. The B-29 was never just a bomber, it was a statement. It said, America can build things you can't even imagine. And we can build them in numbers you can't hope to match. When those 334 B-29s appeared over Tokyo on March 9, 1945, they weren't just delivering bombs. They were delivering a message to Japan, to Germany, to anyone paying attention. This is what the industrial might of a truly modern superpower looks like, and there's no defense against it. The morning after the Tokyo raid, Curtis LeMay stood on the tarmac as his bombers returned. He counted them as they landed. Most made it back, not all. Someone asked him if he thought the raid would shorten the war. LeMay took a long pull on his cigar, watched another B-29 touchdown smoke trailing from an engine that had nearly failed. "It already has," he said. He was right. Japan surrendered 5 months later. And in the rubble of Berlin, in the prisoner of war camps where German officers tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong, the B-29 kept coming up in conversations. Not as a footnote, not as just another weapon, but as the moment when they realized they'd been outmatched from the start. One former Wehrmacht general, years after the war, gave an interview. He was asked what Germany should have done differently. He thought for a long time. "We should have understood." He finally said that America wasn't just another country with factories. It was the factory, and once they decided to fight, there was only ever going to be one outcome. The B-29 Superfortress didn't win World War II alone. No single weapon ever does. But it proved something that changed the course of history. It proved that wars aren't just won on battlefields. They're won in factories, in engineering firms, in the unglamorous work of logistics and supply chains and mass production. And when those 334 massive bombers flew over Tokyo, that March night carrying fire and destruction on a scale the world had never seen, they weren't just ending a war. They were announcing the arrival of a new kind of superpower, one that could build the impossible, and then build it again and again, until there was nothing left to fight against. That's what stunned the German commanders. Not the technology, not the destruction, the inevitability of it all.